Good evening. I am your bard, your storyteller, your keeper of tales, your curator of stories. I am Archibald, and welcome to another fabulously creepy stories. Now, it is that time of year again, the time where all the boys and girls dress up in costumes and show off their true selves, their truly wicked, spiteful, and evil selves. And we stop pretending to be the civilized human beings that we try to think we are. Oh, what a wonderful time of year it is. But that's for tomorrow. So, let's all get ready and put ourselves in the mood for all the creeps we're going to have tomorrow night. By having some creeps tonight with some fabulous stories. And thank you for showing up. I know it takes a strong will to withstand these fabulously creepy tales, and I appreciate it. And I oh so say you're welcome for the nightmares you're sure to have. Now, I know last week, one of our stories got a little bit long-winded. I will try to remedy that by choosing shorter stories. Let's see how tonight's theme goes. And our first story tonight was actually submitted to us by a fellow Choppy crew member, Shahid. On our Discord channel, he has submitted a story he found on the No Sleep Reddit. This story is called The Call of the Void, submitted by Richard Saxman. So let's begin. Have you ever found yourself at the top of a tall building with the irresistible urge to jump? Or perhaps you've been cutting vegetables and just wondered what would happen if you slit your own wrist? Maybe you simply wanted to swerve your car into oncoming traffic just to see what would happen. These are the urges I've been fighting ever since I was a teenager. Despite this fact, you needn't worry, because I'm not depressed, nor am I suicidal. In fact, I always consider myself in my life to be mostly decent. Apart from these bizarre tics I have, nothing too substantial to complain about. It's just that instinctual need to control your own destiny, even if the only thing left to control is your own death. I'm sure some of you have felt it already. It's quite a common phenomenon named the Call of the Void. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Most of us have these thoughts from one time to another, regardless of our mental state. However, most of us never actually answer that call. Most of us. A few days ago, I finally succumbed to the desperate need to control my own end. And while I didn't experience what I typically consider death, I was able to see what existed beyond the void. I wish I would have just died instead. It all happened in early morning hours. I was hiking with a couple of friends up the mountain. Seeing as we all had the day off from work, we figured we might as well do something mildly healthy. We reached the top within a few hours, and the view that greeted us was breathtaking. Being the prick that I am, and much to the dismay of my friends, I sat myself on the edge with my feet dangling off the cliffside. As I sat on the edge, I once again felt the sudden pull towards the void. An incessant call to just find the truth, to jump, and finally be at peace with myself. Like 1,000 times before, I felt something dark within me, something evil that existed just beyond reach of my conscious mind. With little to no hesitation, I jumped. It wasn't a conscious thought, but merely an instinct pulling me towards my own dismay. It's true what they say. When you're inches away from death, everything moves in slow motion. If you're lucky, you'll see the best parts of your life. Your first kiss, driving a newly purchased car, the sight of the beautiful sunset. Unfortunately, all I saw was an ocean of student debt and countless hours of procrastination spent browsing the internet. Other than the obvious, there were a few funny thoughts running through my head as I rapidly accelerated towards the ground. Did I delete my browser history? Would my dog understand why I left? Would I be missed? Then I hit the ground. Death came in an instant, one that seemed like an eternity. I felt my bones break against the force of the fall. I felt my internal organs crush to an undefinable mesh, and my blood escaped my body from all available orifices. It was honestly disgusting. After death, I saw no light. No sense of peace to let me know it was finally over. All that existed in the void was everlasting, empty darkness that I floated through, feeling nothing but regret that I jumped off of that damn mountain. I had a little time to consider my actions, as I quickly fell back in a physical form, and I found myself standing in a feet of ice-cold water. The water was shallow, but extended endlessly all around me, like an ocean of black, tarry liquid, gently lit up by the moonlight, except there weren't any recognizable lights to be found. Everything was just illuminated on its own, barely enough to make out my own surroundings, but enough to get around. Even in death, my bones were still broken, my lungs punctured, and my mind devastated by my own weakness. Though I was functional, the pain remained. I screamed for help, begging for someone to get me out of there, but no one came. Without any better options, I started walking, hours on end, and pulling my numb feet through the murky waters, wandering throughout the eternal night. Eventually, I saw something that broke the horizon. Just silhouettes that wandered aimlessly around like myself. There were people. I caught up to them quickly, but they weren't there to rescue me. Hundreds and hundreds of broken people. Some with slit throats, some with broken necks, and others entirely crushed to bits. None of them acknowledged my presence. They just proceeded going in no particular direction. I shook them. I tried to yell at them, but nothing seemed enough to demand their attention. After working myself through the crowd, frantically trying to get anyone to see me, finally, one of them took note of me. "Oh no, not another one," a young boy said. Couldn't have been older than 16. "What's going on? Where am I?" I asked, slightly frightened to know the answer. "You're in the void, just like all of us," he stated matter-of-factly. "The void?" "Yeah, you know, ep9 de vide. You probably had a sudden urge to crush your car or just jump off a building or something. It's the same story every time someone else ends up here." He took a brief pause to let me process this information. "So, what year are you from?" he asked. "Excuse me?" "The year. How long ago did you die?" 2019. Why?" 2019. Wow. Has it really been that long? I must have fired questions at him like a machine gun following that statement. But he was kind enough to answer all of them with an oddly placed sense of enthusiasm and patience. Though I suppose being patient is not really a virtue when you're in a place where time truly is infinite. He too introduced himself as Leonard. Like me, he had felt the call of the void, or ep9 de vide, as he so affectionately called it. And after some hesitation, he pulled up his shirt to reveal a completely crushed chest. Apparently, he'd been learning how to drive, happy to finally have some freedom in his life when he suddenly decided to crash his car into a tree. It was in 1982, 37 years in the void with no hope of escape. What about the others? I asked as I gestured to the anodonic creatures walking around us. Oh, they've been here for ages. Not many people answer the call, but everyone that does end up here. The last person I spoke to killed themselves in 1985. Here, that's him over there. Leonard pointed to a man with a slit throat, walking a few yards ahead of us. One of the people who ignored me earlier. Yeah, this place takes its toll on me. Eventually people just kind of degrade. They turn to autopilot and eventually fall behind. Falling behind would have been the ultimate fate for all of us, Leonard explained. Depending on your mental strength, you can only last a certain amount of time before the void ate away at you, leaving you as nothing more than an empty husk of your former self. How come you're the only one who's still sane? I haven't given up yet. I know there has to be a way out of here, and I'll be damned if I succumb to that nightmare without finding it. Whatever exit Leonard dreamt of, it never showed itself to us. We followed the lifeless people, still marching faithfully towards the horizon. And even now and then, someone would fall behind and simply stop walking. I thought a lot about what happened to those people, but Leonard told me it was best to just not think about it. How am I supposed to not think about it? I asked. Easy. Don't think about don't think about a pink elephant, he said. Wait, don't what? It's a paradox. If you know you're not supposed to think about something, you're absolutely going to think about it. I suppose that makes sense. He patted me on the back, surprisingly mature for someone his age, even though, I suppose, he had actually existed there for several decades. When I find a way out, you'll come with me, won't you? Leonard asked. Yeah, of course. This can't be the end. Time passed, and I tried my best to keep the spirits up between myself and Leonard. We shared stories from our old lives, hopes and dreams. I told him about what had happened to the world in the almost 4 decades he had missed, and he excitedly listened. He was particularly interested in how far video games had come. How often do you see new people? I asked. Not often, and most only survive a few days. I think you have to be in a pretty bad state of mind to actually answer the call of the void. Not like us, mind you, he said. Keeping time was an impossible feat there. But to the best of my estimation, years passed. Every now and then another unfortunate soul answered the call and joined our march, only to fall behind a few days, entirely skipping the autopilot phase. Our talks weren't enough, and Leonard slowly started becoming more tired, less talkative. He started saying that he just wanted to keep walking without focusing on anything else. Before I could find a way to stop it, he had turned into one of the others. He stopped interacting with me completely and didn't even acknowledge my existence. Time has taken its toll, and it had taken him with it. While he's still marching alongside us, there was nothing left inside his soul. I spent the next part of eternity on my own, desperately begging not to lose myself in the void, like so many of the others before me. For each march across the horizon, more people started dropping out from the march, left behind to fade into the background. And when the time came, Leonard stopped walking with us as well. I tried so damn hard to drag him with me, but I had become weak, and nothing I could do would save him. I hated myself, but had no will to fight back anymore. Ages, eons passed, and every so often I found myself staring behind the group, away into the distance, hoping Leonard would come running. But instead of his familiar face, I saw something else. A light, suddenly glaring a couple miles behind the march. It was magical, mystical, horrifying. 1,000 different emotions built up inside me. I was utterly terrified, but I knew it would be my best bet to walk towards the light. I yelled, tried my best to get others' attention, but they ignored me, as they always had, and without any other choice, I ran towards the light of my own. The light shined before me, growing in intensity for each passing step, and long before I could reach it, the light all but blinded me. Within seconds, my bones stopped hurting. I could finally breathe normally again, and as sudden as it all had started, I found myself sitting on the edge of the cliff, with my friends, yelling at me to back away. Only seconds had passed since that fateful day when I answered a call. I was alive again. I stumbled to my feet and quickly stepped back in shock, and without hesitation, I embraced both of my long-lost friends. For them, only a moment had elapsed, so my misplaced moment of affection slightly confused them. We spent a couple of hours in the mountain together, with me just staring into the beautiful lit-up horizon, being warmed by the sun I so dearly missed. And then we went home. A few days went by and I started to wonder if it had all been real. Despite spending an eternity in the void, it seemed so fascinatingly distant, but the memory of Leonard lingered in my mind. I spent some time researching him online. He had given me his name, which city he lived in, and how he had been killed. All of that combined was enough to dig up some newspaper cutout posted online as a memory, years later when the internet became popular. His picture matched perfectly with what I had remembered, and the story added up. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. Leonard was real, and I had left him to vanish, alone in the void with no one to help. It didn't take much for my life to fall to shambles. I tried focusing on my work, and to find any resemblance of a love life, but nothing worked. Sleep eluded me every night, and the thoughts of my lost friend dug deeper into my subconscious, begging me for attention. There's not much more to say about the story, but please, if you ever feel the call to the void, turn around and just go home. Don't answer it. Don't let it be anything more than a curious thought that you ignore. When it comes to me, it's too late. I already know what's there, and I can't live with it, leaving all those people behind. If you never hear from me again, just know that I went back to save my friend, and I tried my best to do the right thing. And that is the end of that tale. Thank you, Shahid, for submitting it to us. It was quite horrifyingly delightful. And welcome to the stream, Amber Jer. I would like to add more spooky soundtracks, Choppy. That sounds like a wonderful idea, Amber Jer. Perhaps I should change up my music style for these streams. I do know I've been using the same tracks lately, but change might be in order. We'll see how it goes next week. Oh, and don't forget, if you have any creepy tales you'd like to be spoken on this stream, join the Discord, and we have a creepy story channel there. You can submit it there, and perhaps yours will be chosen, and I'll read it next week. Now, let's move on to another story, a short story. This one from the Scoop Boot. This story is called He Stood Against My Window. Submitted by Sabet Hook. I don't know why I looked up, but when I did, I saw him there. He stood against my window. His forehead rested against the glass, and his eyes were still and lit, and he smiled a lipstick red cartoonish grin. And he just stood there in the window. My wife was upstairs sleeping, My son was in his crib and I couldn't move. I froze and watched him, looking past me through the glass. Oh, please no. His smile never moved, but he put his hand up and slid it down the glass, watching me. With matted hair and yellow skin and face through the window. I couldn't do anything. I just stayed there, frozen, feet still in the bushes I was pruning, looking into my house. He stood against my window. Oh my, it seems like those Girl Scouts are getting really aggressive for their sales. And Amberger says, SCP reading, if Cranky hasn't already asked for it. I'll have to look back at the messages to see if he has. But I assure you I will do my best to find it, and I'll be sure to read it, either tomorrow during the Halloween stream, or next week in the next Fabulously Creepy stream. We are already 9 episodes in, not including the pilot. Can you believe that? Oh, how wonderful. And I'd like to thank everybody who has shown their support for this stream. Let's continue spreading the nightmares. Now, on to our next story. This story is from the Creepypasta website. It is called How to Exit Your Body During Sleep Paralysis, written by Christopher Maxian. So let's begin. The sleeping mind fascinates me, namely the nightmare hallucinations we call dreams. Because of this, I keep a journal to record every thought that passes through my brain at night. I set at least one alarm each day so that I'm able to wake up during my REM cycle and recall my grandest dreams. Sometimes I fall back asleep, but for the most part, I keep up with it. It's been an enlightening experience, and so far, I filled a dozen notebooks with my nightly adventures. It seems Amateur is letting me know that SCP isn't genre. I've heard that before. I just can't put my finger on it. I'll look it up after the stream, Amateur, but thank you for letting me know. Now back to the story. Oh, and I forgot to mention thank you, Shaolin, for that pumpkin you've sent us. Ooh, those ice cream cones turned into pumpkins? What a delightful flavor. Carving more knowledge on the subject. I recently perused my town's library's massive local author section. I was hoping to find a book on dreams I hadn't read, as this was the one part of the library I had yet to set foot in. It was a long shot, but one I was willing to take in the name of research. Oh, I'm sorry. Apparently I skipped a paragraph here. Let me go back. In addition to cataloging my dreams, I studied the phenomenon. I've dissected every sleeping guide at my disposal and watched countless documentaries. I even took an elective back in the high school called Nocturnal Fantasies. Though it only lasted one semester, not enough students shared my affinity for the topic. In other words, most of my waking life is consumed by sleep, in one form or another. After finishing through a plethora of self-published romance novels, I happened across one non-fiction title that caught my eye. Sleep Tactics, Exercises for Mind at Rest. Written by Jack Grovewood. The blurb on the back was vague and reminiscent of a self-help book with quotes like, "Learn the secrets of a good night's rest," and "Feed your mind's insatiable appetite for better understanding." Not a book on dreams per se, but it did pique my interest. Delving into the book at home, I found it to be more up my alley than I previously expected. It was filled with chapters pertaining to lucid dreaming, meditation, and even sleepwalking. I was already familiar with most of the content, but it turned out to be an enjoyable read. It wasn't until the last chapter, though, that I was caught completely off guard. I'll outline most of it below. Chapter 16. How to Exit Your Body. Disclaimer. This is not an OBE, or outer body experience. As stated in Chapter 8, out of body, out of bed. I do not believe in OBEs, but I find that they're just another form of dreaming. What I'm about to divulge to you is something completely different. It's neither an OBE nor any other dream state. This is a way to truly exit your body using sleep paralysis as a catalyst. Before I discuss specifics, I'd like to go over a few prerequisites. To pull this off, you must be proficient in lucid dreaming. What I mean by this is that you need to have lucid dreams regularly and retain lucidity for long periods of time in these dreams. It also helps if you're able to manipulate your dream environment with ease. If you only lucid dream on occasions, you'll have to train your mind to do it more often. See Chapter 6, Becoming a Lucid. If you, however, are unable to lucid dream, then this technique is not for you. It's nothing personal. You simply lack the tools needed for departure. Another requirement is sleep paralysis. Most of us have experienced this at one time or another, but it will help immensely if you experience it on a regular basis. Coupled with lucidity and a focused mind, sleep paralysis is the only way out of your own skin, so to speak. That's not all you need in the way of mental capabilities, but more or less it'll do. It's an added bonus if you had an OBE or Wake Initiated Lucid Dream. See Chapter 6, Wake Onto Sleep. Now, onto the fun part. I'm going to lay this out in a step-by-step fashion by a more detailed explanation of what to expect upon achieving your first departure. Keep in mind, the results may vary. Step 1. Fall asleep on your back in a slanted position. This could be on a recliner or a car seat, but your body must be diagonal relative to the ground level. That's the only way I've ever been able to get this to work. For one reason or another, gravity plays a role. Step 2. Attain sleep paralysis. This is more of a waiting game than a step, as it's not entirely possible to execute at will. When it does happen, lucidity is key. You must be aware that you are in a state of sleep paralysis and be unafraid of your lack of mobility. This is one of the ways being a lucid dreamer comes in handy. Step 3. Once paralyzed, attempt to move your legs. If you're in the proper position, at least one of them should be mobile. If you can't move either leg, then you have to restart and experiment by tilting your seat in a different position. Step 4. Upon freeing one or more of your legs, attempt to free your arms. This will feel incredibly stiff, and you shouldn't be able to move them. Try as you might. You should then feel a sharp sting in your head. Don't be alarmed. You're not having an aneurysm. This is completely normal, and it's necessary to make your exit. Step 5. As difficult and strenuous as it may be, keep trying to free your arms. As you do this, attempt to move the rest of your body as well. Put everything you have into fighting the paralysis. Just don't fall back asleep. Step 6. As you wrestle with your own mind and body, the stinging sensation in your brain is going to grow. It won't be painful, but it will cause a great discomfort. Let it happen. As the sensation builds, you'll start to feel yourself drift away from your body. Don't fight it. Your mind is like a rubber band. It will want to bounce back from where it's been stretched. Don't let it. Follow the flow of departure. If you steal your mind's focus and follow these instructions to a T, you will have successfully exited your earthly meat sack and unlocked a marvel of the mind that has only just begun to understand. And that's the gist of it. The author went to say that you would find yourself in upon departure will harbor some differences to the one you started in. It will appear similar in almost every way, but will be completely void of any life forms. On top of that, nothing will bulge. Everything will remain in its place, as still as can be. After revealing a delicate process of re-entering one's body, the author ended the chapter with an eerie warning. Whatever you do, don't go near the water. I was dumbfounded. The entire book up to that point was factual, but this last chapter seemed like something out of a science fiction novel. It clearly made for good entertainment, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Why have such an out-of-place pseudo-science chapter in an otherwise reputable book? It just didn't make any sense. Thank you for the follow. Orange Trumpetin. As the Choppyreviewer will say, welcome to the crew. About a week passed before I thought about the book again. It was almost time to return to the library, so I decided to reread the final chapter. As absurd as it seemed, I teetered between laughing it off once and for all and actually giving it a shot. I did meet all the requirements, and it would amuse me to some small extent. I could, at the very least, say that I tried it for myself, if for no other reason than to prove that it was just a load of poop. After weighing the pros and cons, I ended up giving in to my curiosity. I knew it wasn't going to work, but it would be a fun little experiment, if nothing else. Besides, was there anything better to do for me during these episodes of sleep paralysis? The only minor nuisance was that I'd have to sleep with one of my recliners in one of my recliners instead of my comfy king-size Serta mattress. A small price to pay for the sake of a scientific discovery, I suppose. On the night in question, I wound up having 3 episodes of sleep paralysis. During the first, I was far too groggy. I completely forgot about the book and quickly fell back asleep. The second one lasted a bit longer, and I was able to remember the steps outlined in the last chapter. I could just barely move one of my legs, and upon trying my arms, I did feel a small but noticeable discomfort in my head. I wondered for a split second if the author was onto something, and that made me a bit excited. Because of this, I jolted awake. Reflecting on the incident, I became intrigued. I still don't believe that I could exit my body, but I knew something was going on. I decided to tilt the recliner back a bit and try again. This time, I would have better control. Next episode came pretty quick. I hadn't fallen asleep yet, but my body was getting ready to. This is it, I thought. I allowed the paralysis to fully set in before attempting anything. It was difficult not to fall asleep, but I managed. This time around, I was able to gain full control over my left leg. I moved it back and forth a few times before trying to free my arms. True to the method, they wouldn't budge and felt oddly stiff, more than they usually do. This is when that familiar sting set in. It jarred me, but it kept going. The more I tried to move my arms, the greater the sting grew. Believe it or not, as I continued, I did, in fact, feel myself drifting away from my body. I tried to keep it up, But my nerves got the best of me. I lost all control for just a moment and I was sucked back in, immediately waking up in the process. Their experience startled the hell out of me. It was beginning to seem more and more likely that the last chapter of Jack Grovewood's book was somehow accurate. My curiosity became aroused to such an extent that I felt an overwhelming need to tell someone about it. Luckily, I knew just the person. My buddy Josh is a character. He believes in all sorts of things that I don't. This causes us to butt heads on a lot of topics. In simple terms, I'm a skeptic and he's a believer. One thing that we can agree on, however, is our love for dreams. He is the only person I can talk to in length about the subject. He also happens to meet the requirements listed in the book. I was hoping he will join me for the sleep session and help me get to the bottom of what's going on. I called Josh up and told him everything. He was ecstatic, as I knew he would be, and agreed to meet me in my place for the following night for departure. In his mind, this was going to go off without a hitch. I wasn't completely sold on it yet. I was just happy to have someone else to tag along for the ride. Fast forward to the following night. We hung out for a bit, and I showed Josh the book. His eyes grew wide upon reading the final chapter, and he couldn't wait to try it out himself. I told him not to get his hopes up, but it was clear to me that it's already were. Ready as ever, we laid down at opposite ends of the living room in my two recliners. Josh cracked a joke about how this was going to be the first night we'd been sleeping together. I threw a pillow at him, and then we were off. Shut Eye was just around the corner. This was when things took a turn for the bizarre. I didn't have an episode of sleep paralysis right away, but I did end up waking a few hours into my nap. I noticed that Josh was fast asleep in his recliner across the room. Needing to empty my bladder, I walked past him to go to the bathroom, tripping over his leg in the process. I met the floor with a thud, and turned around to see if Josh was awoken. To my surprise, he hadn't. I know he was a heavy sleeper, but even he should have been woken up by that. Becoming worried, I called out his name. No reaction. I tried shaking him. Nothing. I grabbed his wrist and checked his pulse. It was there, however weak. This was when I panicked. I ran into my room and grabbed my phone. I scrambled to hit the call button. Just as I was about to dial 911, I heard a loud gasp in the next room, like a diver coming up for air. I ran out there as fast as I could, and in my delight, Josh was awake. He looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Dude, it worked." I was flabbergasted. Though Josh was an enthusiastic believer, downright stubborn at times, he was no liar. I asked him more than once if he was sure it wasn't just a dream, or, and if he insisted that he was absolutely certain. Between his firm convictions and weak pulse just moments before, I had no choice but to believe him. It seemed that the book was legitimate after all. We spent the next couple of hours talking about it. After leaving his body, Josh found himself in my living room, but it was noticeably inanimate. Everything was perfectly still. Not even a speck of dust floated in the air. Josh also noticed that his body was translucent, the milky white outline of its former shape. He attempted to open the door to my house, but the doorknob wouldn't turn, and the door would not budge. It took him a while to realize this, but he found that his new form allowed him to phase through walls. Josh went on to tell me that the world outside was very different from ours. He said it was like having a contrast. It was like having a contrast dialed up on the picture. That the static nature of everything made it feel like we were trapped in a photograph. I tried to imagine it, but I knew I needed to see it for myself. We made plans to go back to sleep and enter the world together. Despite my excitement, I was able to make my first successful departure that night. Josh was waiting in the room for me, next to his sleeping body. Seeing ourselves like that was fascinating in and of itself. And I wanted more than anything to see the world outside. A world where adventure and discovery awaited us. For a week, Josh slept over at my house and we explored the new world. It was fun and downright addicting. Curiosity was what kept us going. We wanted to know more and more about the odd realm we had discovered. Here are just a few things we learned during our excursions. The lighting is fixed. The lighting is fixed. It always looks to be about noontime, though there's no sun in the sky. It's impossible to fade through older buildings. Not sure why. There are no life forms, just as the book stated. Not even animals or insects. Sound is reverbed. There's always a slight echo when Josh and I talk. It's possible to fall asleep there, but you won't dream. If you travel too far from your body, you'll hit an invisible wall and be unable to go any further. Time doesn't pass in the real world while you're departed. After about a month of successful departures, things changed. The more we explored, the more uncomfortable I felt. It always seemed like something was watching us, even though there was no one around. Josh was the opposite. Our late night adventures were becoming so routine to him, and he was becoming bored. He kept talking about water and how he wanted to get a closer look at the pond near the main road. I reminded Josh of the author's warning, but it didn't seem to faze him. Eventually, his curiosity got the best of him. One night, upon leaving my body, Josh was nowhere to be found. I thought that maybe he hadn't departed yet, but up to that point, he had always beat me to the punch. This could only mean one thing. I phased through the walls of my home and raced to the nearby pond. Josh was there, standing at the end of the dock that the locals use for fishing in the real world. I yelled out to him, "Josh, what are you doing?" "It's fine. See? There's nothing to be afraid of. It's just water." I watched as Josh reached down and touched the surface of the pond. It rippled. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The water should not have reacted. We've been there for weeks and hadn't seen a single thing move. Even the air was still. Perplexed, I began walking towards Josh. He lifted his hand up, just as awestruck as I was. As he pulled his arm back, the ripple expanded. With it, a small portion of the water turned dark. After a few moments, something reached out from the blackness. It was a hand. It was a hand. It reached up and grabbed Josh's leg, yanking him downward. He went feet first into the water, holding onto the dock for dear life. As he screamed, I ran towards him. Before I could even get halfway to his position, I watched him disappear into the water. I ran the rest of the way, but the darkness had faded and returned to normal. My best friend was gone. In a state of fear-induced panic, I ran away. I wanted to save Josh, but I didn't know how. Plus, I felt that if I re-entered my body, perhaps I'd find him, awake in the real world. It was wishful thinking, but it was all I had. That wishful thinking fell flat when I awoke. Josh was still unconscious. I tried and tried, but I could not wake him. Eventually, I called 911, and he was taken away in a stretcher. The doctor says that he's in a coma, but he can't discern what the cause is. And that's everything. I'm a wreck over what happened. I've tried visiting Josh in the hospital, but I can't face his parents, and they're always there. Instead, I go out to the pond in the real world, hoping that somehow I'll find the answers. All I do end up finding out more questions. They kept me up at night, along with the recurrent nightmare replaying the events from that day. I've tried to pardon since, but to no avail. Something's holding me back. It might be fear. That world is like a photograph, a still frame of a place we were never meant to see. A moment frozen in time with a layer of reality stripped away, and something is living there. Despite this truth, I feel the need to dive back in and save my friend. He didn't heed Arthur's warning, but I'm the reason he entered the world in the first place. I'm the reason he can't wake up. I have to go back. And that is the end of that tale. How frightfully terrifying that was. To go to a nice peaceful pond simply to be pulled in and never awake again. I do hope you are all enjoying these tales thus far. Now let us move on to our next fabulous tale. This one, here it is. Also found on the Creepypasta site. This one is called The Dark Spot. Written by Shannon Higgins. Let's begin. "Hello, my old friend," Griffin said aloud as he stared out the window at the dark spot. It had been at least 2 decades since he had seen the Shadow Man. A moment later, Julie came into the room and stood next to Griffin at the large bay window. "Holy crap," she exclaimed. "Is that him? Is that the Shadow Man?" Griffin simply nodded next to her. "Baby, I'm just utterly amazed. I can't believe you grew up with that creepy thing outside your window. We gotta put this on Facebook." She left the room for a moment and Griffin sighed. Was he really about to live in this room again? Julie returned a moment later, cell phone in hand, camera at the ready. "Open the window for me, babe. I want to get a good shot at this thing." Griffin complied with his wife's request. Rotating the small metal handle at the base of the window, Julie leaned out as far as she could without making it too dangerous, and proceeded to take several pictures of the dark spot, both with and without the flash. A few minutes later, she was sitting on Griffin's childhood bed and scrolling through the shots, cursing excessively as she did. There was no doubt that Griffin loved her to pieces, but she did have a mouth of a sailor from time to time. "You can't see him in any of these shots. This is horrible. How much did we pay for this phone again?" Griffin put his hand on her shoulder and tried to console her. "Sorry, sweetheart. It just doesn't show up in pictures. Believe me, I tried." She responded. "Screw that. We're digging the expensive camera out of the box tomorrow, and I'm getting a picture of that thing. I think it's the one in the study, where we put all the electronics." Practically their entire existence was packed away in boxes somewhere in the old house. They were in the process of moving into Griffin's childhood home. He had spent the first 17 years of his life in the very room that they would begin to sleep in right at that night. It was a beautiful Victorian-era home, the kind that just weren't made anymore. It had 4 bedrooms, but his parents had converted one into an office, and went into a sewing room for his mother, so there were really only two choices of where to sleep, and it just didn't feel right sleeping in his parents' poor bedroom. Probably never would. His father, who made a substantial living as a heart surgeon, could do nothing for his own health, however, and died a year before from lung cancer. His mother passed away 6 months after that, most likely from a broken heart. Griffin gave some consideration to selling the property, but Julie was having none of it. "You would hate yourself if you let anyone else move in there," she had said, and she was right. Discovering that Julie was pregnant 2 months ago was the main reason to opt out of their loft in the city and to move into a slower life in the rural living. The yard, if you could call it that, was nearly 4 acres in all, but the highlight of the entire property was an enormous oak tree that sat directly behind the house. The house had been there for nearly a century, and the tree much longer than that. One couldn't tell how exactly and how old it was without cutting it down and counting the rings, but Griffin imagined 500 or 600 years wasn't out of the realm of possibility. That's where the Shadow Man lived. Thank you for the spooky applause, Amateur. And thank you for the lemon donation, Shaolin. It's very much appreciated. There was a bare patch facing Griffin's bedroom window. A bare patch which, at night, became a dark patch. When one looked out the window, at the angle, the shadow of the dark spot came all together to create a perfect humanoid silhouette crouching on a branch. It didn't only happen after dark, but there was something about the combination of the back porch light and the light from the workshed that filtered through the leaves, creating the perfectly disturbing image. There were even 2 dots of light, where the eyes could be, and a small line that could easily represent an uneven smile. Griffin was around 6 when he first noticed the spooky image, and although he knew full well that it was just a trick of the light, Shadow, even at that age, his young, fertile imagination took a hold of it and ran. The non-existent details of the Shadow Man were filled in at night by the young Griffin's dreams. With thick, leathery skin that looked like oil poured onto a human mold, it had no nose or ears, only eyes and a large lip-splitting grin, defined by sharply pointed, pearlescent teeth. It would slink into the window at night to terrorize him in a variety of ways, from crouching on a young Griffin's chest and watching him struggle to breathe as he slept, to crawling up the window walls and the ceilings, where it would hiss at the terrified child through its barred teeth. These were, of course, only nightmares, but the effect that they had on his psyche grew up and was sufficient. To say his formative years were troubling would have been an understatement. Once he reached high school, however, Griffin had matured enough to realize the paranoia was of his own doing, and the majority of his dreams became about girls. But the Shadow Man never left him completely, popping by every once in a while, and every few weeks, just to say hi. He remembered standing in the same spot his last night in the house before he left for Johns Hopkins Medical School. He remembered looking at the Shadow Man for what he thought was going to be the last time and thinking, "I'll never see you again, and I will not miss you." He was half right, at least. "I guess I was wrong about that one," he muttered to himself. "What's that?" Julie mumbled back, still scowling over the pictures of the dark spot. She just couldn't figure out why she only see branches and leaves at the bare spot, especially in the pictures where she used the flash. Instead of menacing silhouette, she could clearly see with her own eyes. Straining, she tried to figure out what parts of the trees contributed to this illusion. Nothing. Just talking to myself, he answered. Julie threw her photos down and on the bed in frustration. Well, one thing's for sure, she sighed. There's no way I'm going to be able to sleep in here with that damn thing outside the window. I mean, jeez. I don't know how you did it as a kid. That thing's scary. Griffin smiled. You get used to him. Julie shook her head apathetically. Oh, hell no. And don't you call him him. Tomorrow, you have to put up a floodlight or something, got it? Griffin continued to smile. And tonight, you hold me real close. You got it, Griff? Griffin sat on the bed next to his pregnant wife and held her tightly. I won't let him get to you tonight, he whispered in her ear while they embraced. The teasing resulted in a smack in the arm. The next morning, Griffin rose before Julie, which wasn't uncommon. Most days he was at the hospital before she awoke to the automatic coffee making aroma. Since he was on leave for the move, he could have slept in if he wanted to. And maybe he did, but internal clocks can be a difficult thing to reset, especially his. He was a creature of habit. They had a lot on the agenda to do anyway. The biggest of which was to move the lion's share of his parents' possessions into a sizable attic and basement. There were some things that could be sold, and some things that could be given away, but, much like the house itself, most would be too hard to part with. That didn't mean the stuff needed to stay where it was, however. Griffin was adamant when they decided to make the move that the house and the home that Griffin and Julie Masters, and not that of Benny and Mary. It wouldn't have been fair to either of them to try to make a life and home surrounded by possessions and memories of someone else's life, even if it was of his parents. Julie, who had been a bit of an aspiring decorator, was so excited for the opportunity to redecorate the immense estate anyway. Who was he to take away that opportunity from her? He loved his wife so much. Even as she slept with no makeup and a bird's nest on her head, she was still the loveliest thing Griffin had ever seen. Turning from her, he looked out the window at the oak tree and the bare spot. How many times had he looked at that spot during the day, just trying to piece together what it was he was seeing at night? What nod, what branch, what series of leaves contributed to this eerie figment that appeared at night? A greater percentage of his childhood was spent studying the bare spot, that he cared to admit, even to himself, and here he was, 20 years later, doing the same thing. After his coffee, but before Julie woke, Griffin left for the local hardware store to get the floodlight from the back of the house, and had it mounted by lunch. When the sun finally went down, they discovered just how well it worked, and it lit up the entire backyard like Wrigley Field. This was absolutely no risk of the Shadow Man's return with this thing turned on. However, there was a very high possibility that neither of them would get any sleep again. It was so bright that it filled the bedroom and half the hallway. I guess I won't need a lamp to read in bed anymore, Julie had joked, but still ended up sending him out to shut it off. I guess the Shadow Man wins again, she continued. She continued to kid as he came back to bed, but he found he wasn't able to laugh with her. It was such a stupid thing to even be concerned with, but he was. He was a renowned doctor, for Pete's sake. There were so many crucial things that he needed to worry about, but now that the Shadow Man was back in his thoughts, he refused to leave. The only saving grace was that he had yet to appear in Griffin's dreams again. Several days passed before the Shadow Man came up in conversation again, mostly because they had so much to keep busy in the unpacking process, but also due to Julie having stacked the bay window full of boxes to obscure the view out. When they finally removed and saw the dark spot again, Julie jumped into action with the recently found Pentax 645D digital camera, which ran about $10,000 when Griffin had gotten it for his wife from a Christmas before last. Similar to her current decorating aspirations, amateur photography was her passion, at that time at least. If Griffin were being honest, there was really very little to what his wife couldn't do. It was just hard to keep her focused on any one thing for an extended period of time. She had an innate ability to master her passions very quickly and then become bored with them, as was common with people who shared her very high IQ. That was, of course, one of the many things he loved about her. She managed to snap a handful of pictures before the front bell rang. It rang out loudly, drawing her attention away from the task. It was the closest neighbor of the 30 years who came to welcome Griffin. It was the closest neighbors of the 30 years who came to welcome Griffin back to the area. And with crumb cake in hand, they met the wife of the lanky teen they remembered being so introverted. It turned into a lovely evening with the McMillans, sharing a few embarrassing stories from Griffin's youth, but mostly just reminiscent about his parents. They had become very close to Ben and Mary over the years, and their death hit them pretty hard. "They're just so sweet," Juliet said later that night. "I wanted to scoop them up and put them in my pocket." Griffin nodded in agreement. "Did you see the way he kept holding her hand?" She cozied up and put her hand on his chest. "Are you going to hold me like that when we're their age?" He took her hand and turned it over in his own. So much that people will think we're glued together. It was, as usual, the perfect answer. It had been a wonderful day, and the topic of the Shadow Man hadn't come up at all. Griffin hadn't given him a single moment's thought, until Julie's last words before drifting away to unconsciousness. "Decorative lights." It was so soft he could barely hear her. "Huh?" he prompted. "Lights?" "Yeah." She was slipping fast, eyes already closed. "Lights. For the tree. Damn shadow dude." And then she was out. "Damn it," Griffin muttered. He had almost made it to the state of sleep without the Shadow Man invading his mind, and now, albeit unintentionally, Julie had placed him in front and center, just as he would be entering his dream theater. He tried desperately to push his thoughts elsewhere. His patience, the move, even the sweetness of the McMillans, but to no avail. The Shadow Man just kept pushing his way in. Falling into a deep REM state, Griffin found himself face to face with the demon. Although his was the face of a 10-year-old Griffin, and not his current stature. They were seated across from one another on the floor, the creature crouching while he sat Indian style. This was a new scenario. The Shadow Man was making no aggressive moves, only smiling its unsettling smile, and in a moment of odd lucidity, Griffin seemed to realize that he was in a dream. The revelation emboldened him to reach out his hand toward the Shadow Man. Perhaps making contact would be the key to overcoming the psychological power that this thing held over him for so long. The Shadow Man reached one gnarled hand out as well, and their fingers were only inches apart. Griffin felt unafraid. For the first time ever, he felt like he had some degree of control over the situation. It was his mind, after all. Shouldn't he be the one directing the action? "What do you want from me?" Griffin asked, completely calm. "Why won't you just leave me alone?" For the first time that he could remember, the Shadow Man made a noise other than a hiss. It was a disturbing, physically nauseating screech somewhere between the nails on a chalkboard and a dental drill. It started small and began to grow louder and louder, to the point where Griffin had to cover his ears with his hands. But even then it penetrated, right into his brain. He began to scream as well, and just as the shriek reached a crescendo, and Griffin thought he could take no more, the Shadow Man leapt from his spot onto the floor, onto the boy's chest, knocking him backwards. Adult Griffin shot upright in bed, knocking Julie from his chest in the process. She mumbled something incoherently and rolled to her side. Griffin was soaked with sweat. The dream seemed like a minute or two, at most, but the alarm clock glowing beside him said differently. It was 5 in the morning and, although still dark outside, he was more than ready to start the day. He rose, gave the dark spot a disdainful glance, and headed towards the shower. Lowe's would be open in a few hours, and he'll be ready to do some shopping for decorative tree lights. Being the first person in the store was convenient, if not a little surreal, but he had no idea what he was looking for, really. This was Julie's area of expertise, and he had really only received half the conscious suggestion to work this out. Christmas tree lights were probably not what she had in mind, but then again, who knows? He ended up settling on everything. The final bill was just under $2,000, as he purchased every possibility for lighting as tree and some things that weren't intended for the purposes for which may have been made to work. Julie could make the final decision on that. You could tell from her expression that his walking in the door with 6 large low boxes, as Julie sat on the kitchen table for coffee, was a bit of an overwhelming start for her day. "Okay," she said, feigning sarcastic indifference. "This makes perfect sense." "You said you wanted tree lights." He dumped the bags on the kitchen table before her. "So here you go." "So, how many trees were you planning on lighting up?" He laughed. "You pick, and what we don't use, I'll take back." Julie started to sort through the various packages and shook her head. "Geez, being away from work is absolutely killing you, isn't it?" Griffin chuckled in agreement. It was better that she thought that rather than the fact that he might be slipping back into his childhood psychosis. His profession brought him close to all number of mental issues, and he knew well the power of the mind. Unfortunately, these were the things he hadn't been trained to treat, things that usually get referred to a different branch of medicine entirely. Not that he was ready to go that route for himself just yet. It was only a nightmare, after all, and he wasn't a child anymore. Oh yes, welcome back, Amberger. I hope you weren't away from the story for too long. Julie ended up deciding on a $30 set of cordless electric candles that could be placed strategically around the tree and then lit via a remote control. "You can probably get these up in a couple hours," she said. "Don't you think?" Griffin skeptically admitted they might take a bit longer, and by the time the sun went down, a little after 7. He had proven it to be the case. Highly motivated and armed with a hammer, nails, and a 40-foot ladder, Griffin made more than a little disappointed at only getting into the tree before the lack of light made the endeavor too dangerous to continue. Leaving the ladder leaning onto the oak, Griffin called it quits for the night and decided to take a short walk around the property. There was a well-worn path towards the edge of the yard that the young Griffin had walked at least 1,000 times, but not for a few decades. It brought back memories of summer nights and catching fireflies, and it was where he was in a deep state of reminiscence when Julie's distant cry broke through his entrancement. "Griffin!" The panic in her voice was evident, even at his distance, and Griffin broke into a sprint. "Griff! Where are you? Griffin, hurry!" Adrenaline fueled him. He made it back to the door in just under a minute. "Julie!" he screamed. "In here!" She called back from the living room, and he hurried to her, finding her on the couch, hunched over her laptop. Griffin wasn't sure what he expected to find, but fortunately, this was not it. Her voice had scared him so badly, his initial reaction, he was ashamed to admit it to himself, was one of anger. This was the type of scream you should only be reserved for mortally impacting situations. "What the hell, Jules?" He tried not to let his irritation come through. "You scared me out of my mind." She looked up from the screen and into his face, and the anxiety came flooding back. Griffin could not remember ever seeing the look on his wife's face, drained of color and full of creased lines he had never seen before. The fear-induced expression made his neck hair stand on end. All she could utter was, "Look," as she pointed at the computer screen. Griffin joined her on the couch, and for a moment wasn't sure what he was seeing. Was this some kind of horror website or something? And then it hit him. He knew exactly what he was looking at, and all the air left his lungs. It was a picture of the Shadow Man in the deep spot. The uber-expensive digital camera not only captured the image previously only available to the naked eye, but it had enhanced the image significantly. It was there, in the dark spot, in perfect clarity with details only seen before in Griffin's night terrors, crouching on the branch, as it always seemed to be. Its legs could be seen easily. Its arms, chest, elbow, shoulders, neck, and torso all plainly evident. This was no trick of the eye or shadowy illusions. This was clearly the image of a real creature, sitting in the tree, outside their bedroom window. They sat there in silence, for several long minutes, staring at the image, struggling to wrap their minds around it. While working it through, Griffin came to the realization that made something in his mind snap and brought him back into action. If that damn thing was real, then so was all the stuff it had put him through growing up. Anger overcame the paralytic fear, and he ran to his father's gun cabinet up in his upstairs office, grateful they hadn't hurled it back into the attic. After grabbing his father's double-barreled shotgun and tactical flashlight, Griffin started to head back downstairs, taking a quick look from the hallway and through his bedroom window at the Shadow Man, crouching where he always was. As he headed outside, Griffin was aware that his behavior was that of a paranoid, delusional psychotic. But if that was the case, then Julie was too. She was in the kitchen and made no effort to stop him when she saw the shotgun, worried etched on her face. She reached one hand towards him, her eyes telling him to be careful, while her mouth remained unable to move. Outside, he got in the only space right next to the house which provided any type of ground view of the dark spot. It was an uncomfortable angle, and he had to strain his neck to see anything at all, but there it was. Something. It was hard to tell. It could be a trick of the eyes, but Griffin could swear he could make out the edges of two knees poking out, and possibly the tops of the head. He had never tried to look for that thing at this angle before, and even if he had, he wouldn't be able to see it. He wouldn't be able to see anything from a child's height. Griffin snapped the tack light into a plastic fixture attached to the top of the gun and leveled the instrument onto the dark spot. He turned the light on, flooding the tree with illumination, and any semblance of the creature he might have thought he saw before was gone. Just an empty branch and a bare spot. Turning the light off, back a small bit again, he screamed at the tree, his voice in unbridled hatred. "Get the hell out of my tree, you bastard, or I'll blow you out." Griffin wasn't sure what to expect from that other than a small sense of cataracts. But what he didn't expect was that it would move. Despite Julie's pictures, there was something in the back of his mind that refused to believe that the Shadow Man was real. It was just outside the realm of reality that he still expected it to be an unusual optics combined with an extreme paranoia. When the Shadow Man's head leaned forward and made eye contact with Griffin's, all of that was out the window. Griffin flicked the light back on. Nothing. He was still a little remiss to fire. The last thing he wanted was to blow a sleeping squirrel or a bird's nest out of the tree. That gave to Peter, for goodness sake. The light was extinguished again. It was fully leaning over now, almost fully exposed, its sharp little teeth grinning at him. As soon as it began hissing, the horrible dreamlike hiss, Griffin fired his first shot. The painful, high-pitched squeal from the night before echoed out in the night air unexpectedly, and the shock of it combined with its weapon recoil sent Griffin falling backwards onto his pants. There was a deep thud of something large falling to the ground several feet in front of him. Griffin fumbled with the gun for a moment and then switched the light back on. Scanning the area, he got quickly to his feet and flipped the light back off. It was there, writhing on the ground. And when it knew that it had been seen again, it began to hiss. Griffin leveled the gun again and was about to fire a second shot when he heard Julie screaming out from behind him and turned for a split second. "Griff?" She was scared. "Are you okay?" When he turned his attention back to the Shadow Man, it was gone, and no combination of turning the light on and off brought it back into view. There were, however, thick, black drops in the ground around the oak tree. Blood? Maybe he had killed it. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Griffin did feel a sense of relief concerning the apparition. Not that it mattered in the long run. That, and for every night after, the dark spot only looked like a dark spot. It really wasn't even a dark spot, as one could see a small patch of the night sky shining through the center of it. That was irrelevant for Griffin and Julie, however. And the house was sold a month after. They would be raising their new child in the city after all. Amateur, I would have to agree with you. Time to burn that house down. I hope you all enjoyed that story. Oh, and thank you for the follow, Royalty Overlays. And happy Halloween to you. Thank you for the 2 pumpkins. It's very much appreciated. And thank you for the follow, King Wormy. I hope you're all enjoying these fabulously creepy stories. Now, before I end the stream, I'd like to read one more very short tale for you all. This one is also, I believe, reminiscent of a dream story. Let's see here. Ah, here it is. This one is also from Creepypasta. It is titled The Candleman, written by Anonymous. We see that name quite often. So let's begin. Over the hill and through the moor, the Candleman comes walking up to your door. He lights up a candle and walks to your bed, leaves a candle in the window, and leaves with your head. That's the nursery rhyme my grandma used to tell me when I was young. I remember that little rhyme terrifying me as a child, as I cowered underneath the covers of the bed in my small country cottage, too scared to sleep. She described him as a tall, pale man in a robe, who liked to kill little children. And whenever he killed, Grandma would say in hushed voice, he would leave a ghostly candle in the window. At that she would yell out and make me jump back in fright while she shrieked with laughter, "The Candleman!" Even the name gives me the chills. It seems like such a horrible, scary thing to tell a child. But then again, Grandma was a scary woman. She was small, with weathered skin and cruel, sunken eyes that always seemed to glare at me. After Grandpa died, she hardly ever left her house. Just sat in her rocking chair, telling stories of the Candleman and taking delight in my fear, laughing madly when I jumped. I found her to be such a disgusting woman. Anyway, when I grew up, I learned that it wasn't her fault really. Grandpa's death had shaken her, messed with her head. She didn't know what was appropriate anymore. Grandpa was only alive when I was a baby, and I never knew him. But I learned when I was older how much he had meant to Grandma. Without him, she had been broken. She died when I was 13, and I guess it didn't really come to me as much of a shock. She was incredibly old and frail, after all. Now I'm 30, with a wife and a little girl. We had a comfortable suburban home, and I couldn't be happier. There has been one thing that's shaken me up recently, however. It was a silly thing, but it still scared the hell out of me. A nightmare. In the dream, I was in my bedroom, comfy under the covers, when I heard a tune being played in the piano downstairs. I knew what was being played as soon as I heard it. The Candleman. Goosebumps ran up my arm and neck, and ice filled my stomach. I sprinted down the narrow staircase into the living room, where I saw a tall, pale figure in a robe holding a candle, leaving through the open door. A Candleman. He was about 6'4" or 5", with dead-looking beady eyes and a wide, evil grin. I woke up suddenly in a cold sweat. I turned on the light and read until I just continued to read my books until I was able to go back to sleep again. I put the dream down to too many drinks and coming home on Halloween, but it freaked me out anyway. And that takes me up to yesterday, Halloween night. I was trudging back from a party, not drunk. I don't drink. but still woozy from tiredness. I thrust my hands in my pocket for warmth, whilst I was walking back through the crisp orange leaves. The poem of the Candleman popped into my head. My heart began to thud as I walked down the poorly lit street, leaves crunching underfoot. The pale moon casted long shadows along the path. In my mind's eye, I could see the Candleman, thin and ghostly, running up to me, cutting off my head with one swing of his axe. Silly, I know, but the dark can make my imagination run wild sometimes. I arrived on my road and began to calm down. I felt silly for having let the poem get to me. I was perfectly safe under the streetlights. As I arrived in my front yard, I noticed a tall man in a robe, standing at the end of the street, his face shrouded in darkness. He appeared to be staring at me. Once again, images of the Candleman flooded through my head, sending my heart rate into overdrive. I shook it off. Is this just a tall man in a Halloween costume? Nothing to be scared of, I assured myself. As I attempted to slow my breathing, I then looked up at my house, hearing demonic laughter from the man's direction. An icicle of terror stabbed at my heart. There, in my daughter's window, flickering softly, was a candle. And with that, we are going to end our tales for tonight. I hope you all enjoyed our fabulously creepy stories, and I hope you have the most wonderful and fabulous nightmares tonight. It is the proper way to prepare for the Halloween season after all. I hope to see you all tomorrow, or rather, the Choppyreviewer will be back tomorrow, doing a special Halloween stream. So be there, and I'll return next week for another episode of Fabulously Creepy Stories. Good night.